Today we're talking about Skinny Dipping by Funky Bun. Originally I was gonna wait till it's done, but I already have enough to talk about with this comic, so why bother waiting? In the description of the front cover, Funky has a little comment saying, "It's time to test my comic writing skills in something big and new. This will be a more down-to-earth story about exhibitionism and nudity. No more constraining checklists of things that need to happen within a number of pages, but rather some breathing room for character development." I'm mentioning this because this tells us what Funky is interested in doing and improving at with this comic, character development. And conveniently, character is also the point that stood out most in my mind when it comes to this comic. So let's talk about that. Before we talk about character development, I think we first gotta establish who these characters are in the first place. And this is where I'm a bit surprised, because usually you're really good at expressing emotion through dialogue and art, but I don't feel like we get told very much about these characters, and especially not in the introduction. First, let me show you something. In the first episode of Beastars, we, funnily enough, get introduced to the main character, Legozy. And the way the entire thing is handled, I think is really good. Let's just focus on one scene in isolate. Actually, just fuck that. Let's just take the entire thing. It's extended tangent time. First of all, Beastars is not just a story about one or a few characters, but it's a story about a whole fictional world. We follow Lego throughout most of the show, but plenty of times we also take a step back and look at something that barely has any relation to Lego. And the reason for that is that the entire fictional society is an important part of Beastars. So little lore pieces that tell us about how the world works, clues us into how this society works, and through that gives us a better understanding of Beastars as a show. So when introducing Lego, we aren't just interested in who Lego is, we're also interested in who he is in relation to other characters. Like, what does other characters think of Lego? Therefore, we start out not by seeing Lego, but by seeing other characters talk about him, and specifically herbivores. These fellas barely know him, they don't even seem to know his name. They only know that he's a wolf, and his fur's great, and that he's in the drama club. But just him being a wolf alone is enough to make them afraid that he is dangerous. So that gives us an idea of how herbivores might view Lego. Next, we see Lego in person, together with two other carnivores in a changing room. Lego is fucking with the closet, while these two completely ignore him. Now, it could just be that these two are very distracted by talking, but when the show actively decides to show us Lego for the first time, and it's a shot of him walking in the shadows with two others being completely oblivious to his existence, I at least get a feeling that the show is trying to tell me that Lego is a quiet kid. And I think this is a good scene. It's really short, but it's a powerful scene of these two just not even noticing he exists. Like, at the end you can actually see they get surprised by the sound of the door opening, because they didn't see him walking by. And Lego going unseen so easily, despite that he's fucking huge, that instantly nails that hallway ghost feel for me. And that gives us an idea of how other carnivores might view Lego. Next scene, we see Lego staring at the sheep girl from earlier. And then while an argument breaks out, one of the members of the club, who actually seems to know Lego, mentions that she wants to find Lego because she wants him to help her crack open her jar of nuts, which is a really cute image, and it starts to hint that maybe Lego isn't as ominous as some of the prey might think that he is. And then finally we see the same sheep girl again, and now she's alone and outside, and Lego is walking towards her, real ominous looking. But then, surprise, no foreseen for us, cause he's here to give her a love letter from the guy that died in the first scene. He then proceeds to sit on a separate bench from her, despite that she probably wouldn't mind moving over a bit, and then he stands up and very symbolically walks back into the shadows. The sheep girl stops to tell him that she's gonna tell everyone that Lego isn't as evil as they all believe tomorrow, but Lego refuses, because if she tells everyone why Lego approached her, everyone will find out about the dead guy's crush, and Lego doesn't want the poor dead dude's secret to get out like that. And according to Lego himself, Lego's used to being disrespected anyway. Lego then walks off, slouched over, while staring down at the ground, a sight which we will get very familiar with throughout the rest of the show. This is what I believe to be a good introduction, because it tells us a lot of information about Lego. We learn that plenty of prey fear him, while some predators don't even acknowledge his existence. We learn about his social life, or lack thereof. We learn that he clearly listens to people around him, even when they don't respect him or maybe don't even acknowledge him. We learn that he's kind enough to give her this letter, despite there being no reward for doing so. And we learn that he clearly thinks ahead and that he might have an inferiority complex. Every scene serves a purpose. Every scene tells us something, sometimes multiple things at once. Remember, this was just a little analysis with focus on Lego. There's also information in scenes which isn't directly relevant to Lego. Like here, we learn what's going on in the drama club, while also fleshing out Lego. Or here, we see how quickly the drama club, which is supposed to be a symbol of friendship, how quickly they turn on each other because of this reason, the devouring event, and because it affected them so much. Alright, but now let's turn back to skinny dipping. We were actually talking about that a long time ago. Now, ideally, I would be able to pick out little similar things here, dialogue interactions that tell us about the characters, but sadly I can't. Definitely sometimes. I do feel like we get a bit out of the dialogue, but often I feel like the dialogue is focused on something that doesn't really matter, or the very little information we do learn about the characters is way too vague. Page 8 here is a good example of what I mean. Raccoon Girl has brought a Bluetooth speaker. Doesn't say much on its own, but alright. This boy here then asks if it isn't a bad idea to make noise because they don't want to get caught. But they explain that they're far enough away from everything, and we get this zoomed out shot showing what I'm pretty confident is the cabin they passed by earlier, which they also mentioned in the text, and that's it. The only info we learn in this scene is that they have a Bluetooth speaker and then a justification for why they can play music, but they're supposed to be in their late teens, very early 20s, right? So aren't they supposed to be reckless anyway? If we really want, we can also squeeze out of this scene that this guy is sorta nervous, this guy is sorta quiet, and this guy is sorta energetic, but all that is things which we have already established previously. And the only practical development that happens in this scene is that now there's musical notes in the background and this guy is not wearing sandals anymore. If this was just one page, alright, whatever, right? But I'm bringing page 8 here up because I feel this is representative of more pages. Most pages before page 8 also features dialogue, but not much of it goes anywhere. Page 3, you mentioned that everyone studies art, except for this guy, but then we move on and we don't learn anything interesting with that information, such as why do they study art? What kind of art do they study? What does art individually mean to these characters? On page 4 you mention a character called Carla, but then again we don't hear anything about what supposedly happened yesterday. We just bring up the topic and then put it down again before it has a chance to go anywhere. We did get some good stuff, like this tea thing here. These two speech bubbles here, I think they're more interesting than entire pages of what we've seen so far. The fact that she first of all knows what a weep means tells us that she's at least somewhat familiar with internet culture. She's definitely also got an interest in anime.
Not because you're a rabbit, but because you're black.
Likely at least a little beyond just a casual interest. And the fact that she uses the word weep about herself while clearly not being a certified Weeaboo Jones tells us that she can be a little self-ironic about it. She also calls everyone else a weep, meaning that we can likely apply the exact same things to all the other characters too. This line is a bit more ambiguous because where I'm from, I'm like, they're college students. Isn't the type that doesn't drink among these kids the one who's gonna stand out? But, I mean, if these kids are all nerds, then, oh, okay, I can see it being a bit more plausible that drinking in their friend group would be considered somewhat unusual. But it could also be cultural difference, maybe? I had this really surreal experience where I overheard someone at my college talking about a transfer student from another country, and this transfer student was like, "What? You guys don't have like a cellar or something to drink in? Like, aren't you supposed to hide that away or some shit?" And I'm just sitting like, where are they from, dude? Like, is this how other countries view drinking? I'm from Denmark, which is, you know, beer country, and I have heard that drinking in Denmark is supposed to be more widespread than some other places. So I'm just not sure whether, like, I'm the weird one here, or whether this girl was just from some, I don't know, kind of very strict village or something. Anyway, I guess, yeah, we could figure something real interesting out if Doppel A here was a bit more in touch with drinking culture in other countries, but sadly he ain't, so what is he talking about? Okay, dialogue, back to the dialogue. The real interesting thing in this comic comes at page 10-ish. When the nudity comes up, and suddenly it starts to feel like there's way more specific emotions behind each statement and way more personal and interesting things getting expressed. So it's like the dialogue quality just instantly improves when the topic becomes sexual, and this makes a lot of sense actually, because I've been praising Funky Bun's comics before, but they were all almost exclusively centered on sex stuffs. But this comic is the first that's not just centered around porn. But it does confuse me a little, because I would figure, since Funky Bun clearly knows how to make dialogue the way that I really like it, where every line communicates something, tells us something interesting, it shouldn't be too difficult just applying the same concepts to non-sexual dialogue, should it? Obviously, I'm not Funky Bun, I can't say, but I hope this video could at least make it apparent what I'm missing, and hopefully also give you an idea of what goes into what I think is a good dialogue scene. If you would still like a little more, then check out this video from the 8-minute timestamp until 10 something. I'll pop the timestamp on screen. That's someone else who breaks down a scene and shows how all the little details of a character interaction, how that can tell us about the characters. I'll have this linked in a pinned comment below. Drop a comment if you disagree with my stance, or if you have anything you want to add. And that said, I'll just crawl back into my dumpster. Eat your vegetables.